Okay, Twilight Imperium players near me.
Oh hey, are we playing Twilight Imperium? Unfortunately, no. We'd actually need friends to pull that off.
Yeah,
And we'd need a spare 8 hours.
yeah.
You know, it's really annoying. I love TI and I'm really in the mood for an epic space game right now, but all the epic space games either require too much time or too many players. Or both. I just kind of wish I could find like a big space game that didn't just feel like a lesser version of these other space games that I love, like Eclipse or Twilight Imperium, you know what I mean? It kind of sounds like you're describing the new Cole Worley game. Arcs. Really? Another Cole Worley game? Goodness gracious. You know that's not what I'm looking for, okay? You know I hate Cole Worley games. His games are complex for complexity's sake. They worry too much with themes instead of actual good mechanics. You know there's no way that he could have made the game that I'm looking for. Oh, come on, man. Don't be that guy. You gotta be willing to give every game a fair shot. I mean, come on. We ended up coming around on Root eventually, didn't we? No. You did, alright? Neither of us actually liked that game. Hey man, don't get me involved, okay? You know how passionate he gets about Root and Oath, okay? Leave me out of it. Fine. You can teach me arcs, because we got nothing better to do while we wait for him to find TI players for us. Still nothing, man. Sorry. Arcs is the latest game designed by Cole Worley, published by Leader Games, and illustrated by Kyle Farron. In this game, 2 to 4 players take control of various characters that seek to dominate the Reach and establish an empire by accruing more power than anyone else. The game is played over a maximum of 5 chapters, or rounds. The player with the most power by the end of the 5th chapter wins. I mean, it just sounds pretty close to Root so far, if you ask me. Well, not exactly. See, one of the first unique things about this game is the means by acquiring power, or victory points. Most games like this operate with a bunch of open paths to victory. Usually combat, holding territory, or leveling up your faction throughout the game. These goals are usually active from the beginning, and they're usually active throughout the entire game. In Arcs, however, players gain power by winning declared ambitions. Think of ambitions as a victory condition for that chapter. You'll see here there are the 5 ambitions: Tycoon, Tyrant, Warlord, Keeper, and Empath. The Tycoon ambition has players competing to hold the most fuel or material icons, either through resources or their cards. The Tyrant ambition has players competing to hold the most captive enemy agents. The Warlord ambition has players competing to hold the most destroyed rival ships or buildings. The Keeper ambition has players competing to hold the most relic icons through cards or resources. And finally, the Empath ambition has players competing to hold the most of the psionic icons through either resources or cards. Resource icons come from holding that resource on your player board and or by recruiting guild cards from this public court into your own personal court. So players just compete to hold the most things? Boring! People are just gonna go pick their own ambitions and pursue those separately. Well, that's the thing. You can't. You see, not all of these ambitions will be active every chapter. Only up to 3 of these ambitions can be active in any chapter. To make an ambition active, players have to declare them. Now, declaring an ambition places an ambition marker worth power onto that goal, now telling players how much they'll score for first or second place in that struggle. But you'll notice that these ambition markers decrease in value, which means a given ambition can be worth more or less points depending on when it is declared. Another fun detail to note is that the ambitions can be double or even triple declared, making it worth even more points that round. Already, with this system, Arc sets itself apart from other games of its ilk. It immediately forces players to be adaptable from the first turn. You can't just focus on one ambition. For one, you have to be able to declare that ambition. But for another, once it's declared, everyone else will also be able to directly compete with you to win that ambition as well. And even more tricky, your resources and guild members can be stolen from you in deadly raids by your opponents. So immediately, you're staring down the barrel of some really sticky choices. You do want to declare ambitions early so that you can get more points, but the earlier you declare, the more time players will have to compete with you. Maybe you should wait to declare? Well, that's also tricky because you might not always have the opportunity to declare at the exact moment that you want to. And the longer that you wait, the more likely it is that other players will declare different ambitions first, making your round a lot harder.
I mean, that is slightly more interesting. How do you declare ambitions?
Okay, that's where we get into the neatest part of ARCs. So, to declare an ambition, you need to have initiative. But to understand initiative, you also first have to understand the action selection system of ARCs, a pseudo trick-taking mechanism of action cards. At the beginning of every chapter of ARCs, each player is dealt a hand of 6 action cards. Now, this deck of action cards contains 4 suits: mobilization, administration, construction, and finally, aggression. Each suit has its own actions you can do by playing that card. Mobilization lets you move your fleets around the board and also send agents to the public court in order to bid for the guild cards. Construction cards allow you to build cities, starports, and or ships, or repair any of those pieces that are damaged on the board. Administration lets you tax cities you control to gain a resource of the planet the city is on. And finally, aggression lets you battle your enemies or secure a guild card from the public court that you have more agents on than your rivals do. Not only does each card have a suit with the actions on them, but they also have a number value and a pip value. When you play a card, you can do actions equal to the number of pips on the card. Lower value cards typically have more pips, while higher value cards typically have less pips. Now, these card values also correspond to the ambitions on this side of the board. How does this all work together? Well, at the beginning of a round, the player with the initiative marker plays the lead card. Leading with a card allows you to take all of the actions from the pips on that card. After that is done, the following players in clockwise order take their turns by playing a card as well. Now, these players have some more restrictions. They only have 3 options. They can copy, pivot, or surpass. Copying lets you take a card from your hand and play it face down, which lets you take 1 action from the lead card. Pivoting allows you to play a card of a different suit face up. However, it only allows you to take 1 action of the card you played. So finally, surpassing allows you to play a card that matches the lead suit of the lead card, but it has to have a higher number than the lead card. This lets you take all of the action pips on your card. At the end of the round, the player who surpassed with the highest number of the lead suit takes the initiative marker for the next round. Additionally, players can also seize the initiative by discarding an additional second card face down alongside the card they played. This basically means that they're going to lose a turn later, but they are going to have a chance that guarantees the initiative for the next round. When you play a lead card, you can choose to declare the ambition that is linked on that card. Declaring puts the highest available power marker onto that ambition, now making it active for points. However, declaring an ambition drops your card's number value to 0, making it easy for players this round to surpass your card and take the initiative from you. What you have here is a highly unique action system that leads to constant weighty decision making, and you have to adapt on the fly.
Okay, so the game is all random then. I mean, it seems like having a good game is entirely dependent on getting a good hand of cards.
That's what you would think initially, and honestly, it will probably even feel that way in your first few games, but it's actually not like that at all. There simply is no good hand in ARCs. They're all bad hands, and let me tell you, this is a good thing. Playing ARCs is not about looking at your hand and sequencing the best possible order of moves, and the reason is because 1, you might just not draw the moves you want, and 2, you won't have control of the initiative for the whole round. You may get what you think is a great hand, only for the right valued cards to never actually be led by other players. Instead, it's about the moment-to-moment decision making. It's about looking for opportunities and being able to grab them before they pass you by. But it's also about weighing the costs in your head. For example, You didn't want to build this turn, but the leader just played construction and you don't have any construction cards in your hand. Do you pivot to mobilization at the risk of losing what might be your only opportunity to be able to repair your fleet? How about this? You didn't want to play your aggression card yet, but it's the only 4 card in your hand and you finally have the initiative. This may be your only chance to declare the Warlord ambition. Should you hold off and probably lose your chance to declare the Warlord ambition, or should you declare it now and risk opening up other players to copy your aggression and retaliate before you're actually ready to face them? Obviously, there is a level of card counting skill here that will significantly improve your games. You may have what you think is a weak hand, but as the round goes on, and as you start to get an idea of what the other players around the table are holding in their hand by the cards they're playing, you can start to make more concrete plans. Or, even juicier, players often talk about their hand or make subtle comments revealing the details of their hand. And when they reveal those details, it's going to help you play around their cards. Even more fun is to drop subtle hints to the other players about what might be in your hand. What really you're doing is secretly manipulating them into leading the suit that you really want so that you can surpass or copy or pivot. There's both a strategic and social element to the card play that is so much fun to play around with. And this is all just the framework of the game. There's still actual stuff happening on the game board because of this exciting card play.
I mean, yeah, it does sound kind of fun so far, but I don't know. I'm still hung up on these cards. I just feel like the game is dependent on drawing the good cards right when you need them. There's no way you can convince me that there's not going to be any scenarios where you just straight up don't draw an insanely bad hand, or the way that the other players play their cards means you'll never actually be able to get control of your actions. Like, how on earth are you supposed to get around those scenarios where you really do just draw a bad hand?
That's a good question. Now, the answer to that problem lies in the final 2 elements of ARCs, and that is the resources and the guild cards. When I talk about resources, I'm sure your head immediately goes to the familiar concept of farming certain kinds of tokens for the purposes of building your buildings and ships, but that's actually not the case in ARCs. Unlike most games, you don't need to have materials in order to build something and then take the build action. No, see, all the things in ARCs come off of the action pips from the cards. Okay, so what are the resources for? Well, resources count for the ambitions, as I said before, but they also grant you these things called prelude actions outside of the card that you played that round. After playing your action card for the turn, but before taking the actions on that card, you can spend any of the resources on your player board in order to take prelude actions. Materials give you a free build or repair action. Fuel gives you a free move action. Relics give you a free secure action. Psionics give you an extra action of whatever the lead card is. And finally, weapons let you use any other action card's pips for battle actions instead of whatever action is printed on the card. You want to build more ships on the same turn before you move and attack? Well, spend your material resources for free build actions, and then move with your new fleet with your played aggression card. You want to copy a lead card, but you need to have more than one action from it? No problem. Use a psionic to boost your actions. Annoyed that you never draw any aggression cards? No worries. Use a weapons resource to turn that 4-action construction card into 4 battle actions. Just like with the action cards, these resources are constantly asking you to weigh the costs in your head. For example, I want to use my fuel tokens to move my fleet a lot this turn, but I noticed that Tycoon is also an active ambition this round. Should I save them instead? Or maybe you try and save your resources for an ambition, but it actually never gets declared. The battle you'll constantly be having with yourself between wanting to hoard the resources and needing to spend the resources is such a fascinating push and pull system. And then there's the guild cards. Guild cards also contribute to ambitions, but more importantly, they give you abilities while they're in your personal court. Often these abilities will help you offset your hand and will give you more flexibility with your actions. Sometimes they grant you all new abilities. Sometimes they modify other actions, and sometimes they give you new alternatives to existing actions. Taking all these elements together, ARCs is a game of adaptability and flexibility, and it's a game about opportunity seeking. It's about the ability to play both the action card system and the resource/card management system to the fullest effect. But there's one last important element of ARC's design. You see, you can't hoard any of these resources or guild cards permanently. In order to fully grasp the biggest struggle in ARCs, we have to talk about battles. Battling in ARCs is unique, fast, and spicy. When a player takes a battle action in ARCs, they get to roll 1 die for each ship that they have in the battle. Pretty simple. But what's not simple is the dice themselves. There are 3 kinds of dice in ARCs, and you get to choose what assortment of dice you'll be using in your combat, mixing and matching as you please. Skirmish dice only have a 50% chance of dealing damage to your enemy, but you'll be dealing that damage from afar, where the enemy can't hit back. So these dice have a 0% chance of dealing damage to you. Assault dice, on the other hand, have a higher chance of dealing damage to the enemy, but you'll also notice that these dice have other symbols. These symbols represent the enemy firing back and dealing damage to you. And then there's the raid dice. Raid dice can be used if you're battling in an area with an enemy building. These dice have a high chance of dealing damage to you. They could deal damage to the buildings directly as well. But, most importantly, they have these key symbols on them. Now, what do these key symbols mean? If you've been paying attention, you'll notice that both your resources and your guild cards all have a key value attached to them, either by being on your player board or on the card themselves. So, as an attacker, if you roll keys equal to the key value of your enemy's cards and resources, you get to steal those cards and resources for yourself. Just like all system and arcs, combat has a risk and a reward system. The dice you choose all have their pros and cons, and the game asks you to determine how much you're willing to gamble to get what you want. Not only does combat have meaty game decisions, but it's also quick. There is no defense roll, there is no attack chart, there aren't no infinite roll-offs until one side loses. It's one simple roll, the attacker distributes all damage, and then the players just go ahead and move on to the next action. What I especially love about the system is that even when bad things happen with these dice, it actually feels more like your fault than it does the dice's fault. In games I've played like TI, Eclipse, or Space Empires, you can do all you want to offset the dice, but at the end of the day, when they roll poorly, it always just feels entirely random. In Arcs, you know the risks you take when you choose which dice to roll. Rolling only blanks on a big pile of skirmish dice doesn't feel as bad, because you knew there was a higher chance of an outright miss when you chose to roll all of those dice. Rolling a lot of return fire on the assault dice was the price you decided you were willing to pay when you picked more of those dice than the skirmish dice. Accidentally destroying the building you were trying to raid was highly likely by taking a lot of raid dice. It's such a great system because succeed or fail, it comes from a choice that you make.
So there's no defense roll at all? It's kind of weird.
There is defense happening, it's just that those symbols are already included on the attack dice themselves. So to pick assault or raid dice is to choose to engage the defending fleet in a manner where they can shoot back. The intercept symbol ensures that a large fleet will scare the attacker, and it's going to have to force them to waste more actions and more time until such time as they can get enough battle actions to actually thin the enemy fleets first with minor skirmishes, which can often be too much time. This may not happen, and so you'll often get into situations where a player has to rush into a battle that they weren't actually able to really prepare for, and they need to deal a lot of damage, and so they have to gamble with a high amount of assault dice or a high amount of raid dice, only to roll the intercept symbol and lose most of their fleet. I think you'll find that after a few battles, you won't miss the tedious roll-offs that you find in other games. It places the importance more on the timing of when you can pull off the combat more than anything else. Often, attacking first is going to be a better outcome for you. So combat in Arcs is actually more about playing the action card game better than your opponents so that you can set yourself up to attack them before they can attack you. So you can set yourself up to have more battle actions, cutting them off before they can respond to you.
Alright, well, the game definitely does sound like a unique one. The rules and systems do sound kind of interesting, but I mean, I don't know, like, you've told me how it works, but is it even any good? Does it actually work that well? And how does it compare to other games of its genre?
I think your question is a valid one. Obviously, Arcs has many unique and interesting systems, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good game. After all, this is a Cole Wehrle game, and there are many people who find his systems interesting, but his games as a whole unsatisfactory. So I think before comparing Arcs to other games in its genre, I want to actually compare it to Wehrle's other games first. Specifically, the other games that he's made with Leader Games. Now, the first thing that sets Arcs apart from Cole's other games for me is its relative simplicity and ease of learning. Many complaints I see online from people who don't vibe with Root or Oath point out the big rules overheads, and I think this is fair. Learning Root entails learning not just one complex game, but 4 separate complex games that overlap with each other. In fact, I even made a video talking about how I hated Root for well over a year because of this barrier. Root takes many games before you finally get it. And Oath, Oath is just a weird game that has so many little quirks wrapped up in the layered victory condition system that Teaching it is always a beast because you have to front load all of the rules. Now, truthfully, I found teaching Oath easier than Root, but there's still the fact that whenever a new player is introduced, the first few games will be slow learning games before everyone can finally gear up to full speed. Not to mention that you need to get at least 3+ games into each of these to start fully experiencing what both of those designs have to offer. Arcs, on the other hand, stands out to me for being easily the most accessible and easy game to teach/learn in Whirly's entire library of work. Teaching Root or Oath for me is probably a 20 to 30 minute affair, plus the multiple learning games. Teaching Arcs? About 10 minutes, and people will be up to speed after the first hand. And additionally, most of the rules in Arcs actually fit into these handy little player aids. And because these cover most of the rules, instead of halting the game with questions, you can easily just reference this little player aid yourself, and you'll probably find the answer that you're looking for. In my opinion, these aids are vast improvements on the reference sheets and the aids available in Root and Oath. And the best part about this is that even though Arcs is easier to teach and learn, it doesn't sacrifice any of the expected Whirly strategic depth. Arcs perfectly embodies the saying, easy to learn, hard to master. The action card system is the best example of this. The rules for the flow of cards is so simple, but the interplay between the cards can go incredibly in depth. I would even bet that the way these cards interact with one another will actually change depending on your group, which is so fascinating. That's because there's both a mechanical and a social aspect to the cards. They could be incorporated into table politics. They could contribute to spicy mind games and bluffs. There's just so much going on with this action system alone. Honestly, I don't even really feel adequate enough to fully explain how exciting it is, even though I'm like 30 games deep into Arcs right now. The other good design choice to me is the decision to split the asymmetrical nature of the game off into separate modules that can be added or taken away depending on your preference or your player group. Now, the game does have asymmetric characters and additional power cards that, when mixed with the different guild cards, can really bring Arcs up to Oath levels of asymmetry for me. However, these are just optional. You can just play the regular basic game as a way to onboard players in their first game. And then, when you get a hold of the new systems, you can introduce these leaders and these lore cards. Or maybe later on, you just feel like playing a simpler version of the game. It's all up to you. I love this decision. Root and Oath are notoriously hard to onboard people, but having different modular levels of complexity and asymmetry is a great way to get people into asymmetric games. The leaders are very simple. Each one has a positive ability and a negative ability. And when paired with these lore cards, they add depth and variety to the game. One thing to note though, is that some of these leader cards can feel blatantly stronger than others on your first couple of games. This isn't to say that some leaders are busted and OP, but that they can feel that way, depending on how a certain game plays out. Now, this may be a problem for some people, but it doesn't necessarily bother me as much, to be honest. Arcs is a game about playing the hand you're dealt, figuratively and literally. Mastering Arcs isn't about getting the best leader and the best lore combination. It's about learning how to work around anything that you've been given and how to find the opportunities presented to you. I think you'll find any leader actually has the potential to be really strong or really weak. It all depends on how well you can adapt. I've played several games where players complain or feel bad about their prospects, but when the game is actually over and everything is all said and done, the group remarks on how close the whole thing was, regardless of their momentary feelings while they were playing the game. I think another improvement to Arcs is that the game just has a faster flow than past games. Root can have a bad downtime problem as you wait for each faction to go through their entire player board. And honestly, same thing with Oath if you're playing with slow players or players with analysis paralysis. Sitting around and watching someone take forever to travel and campaign could lead to disjointed pacing. In Arcs, on the other hand, the cards streamline the pacing of the game into something faster and smoother. Because you're not looking at a buffet of action choices every turn, due to the fact that most turns you'll probably be doing one action, at most 3 to 4. It's so much quicker to take your turn and then move on to the next hand. The gameplay loop is smooth and snappy. Obviously, the initial learning turns may take a little longer, but once everyone gets up to speed, which doesn't take that long by the way, a single base game with 4 players can easily take only 90 minutes. I also find Arcs interesting in that it certainly feels more gamey than Root or Oath, if you know what I mean. I've seen many people comment that Root and Oath are complex for the sake of complexity, or that Cole is too obsessed with the theme, and that it makes his games not feel like games. Now, I disagree, but I certainly see where these people are coming from. Arcs decidedly feels gamey in a way that Cole's past games do not. To be honest, I don't quite think I understand what these action cards actually represent thematically, but I don't think it matters. It's a great piece of game design, and I couldn't imagine the game working without it. While I don't know if Arcs will convert every non-Whirly fan, I think it will convert quite a few. I have a feeling that Arcs can and will be as big as Root, if not bigger, due to its accessibility and its depth of strategy.
It's interesting that this would be such a streamlined game. After Root and Oath, I would have expected more ambition, more of that whirly weirdness, you know what I mean? Hey, wait, what's that?
That's nothing. Don't worry about that right now. Anyway, you were asking about how Arcs compares to other space games?
Yeah.
So, just like other whirly games, this game stands out amongst the crowd because it's so different. You've already noted many of the key differences, I'm sure. The action card system, the ambitions, the way resources are used. These are all very notable differences to other Space Empire type games. And taken as a whole, Arcs really clashes with your expectations of a Space Empire game. And I think that's going to be the biggest battle that people are going to face with this game. Expectations of how games like this should be. That makes sense. That's the way I thought about this game when it was announced. I thought of it as Cole Worley's Space Empire game. And, that assumption makes sense. It is a space game, and it is technically about fighting factions, but after playing it, I hesitate to even classify it in the same genre. I don't think those are the kinds of stories Arcs wants to tell. Arcs, unlike other games of its type, is decidedly more intimate and small scale. Most games have you controlling a vast civilization or a huge empire, but Arcs' factions are actually just singular characters. Unlike Twilight Imperium, where your faction comes with a mountain of plastic ships to build a huge fleet, Arcs capture a limit at only 15 ships, which starts to feel thin real quick. Many Civ-like games are slow and don't have a lot of fighting or entanglement for the first portions of the game. However, in Arcs, players are fighting from the first turn. The board is decidedly smaller, making players actually have to compete immediately for the scraps they need to win the ambitions. There's no turtling or hiding in a corner in Arcs. You can't score points passively like in other games like this. You have to actively go out and fight in order to win. It plays and feels different to any other space game that I've played out there. The knowledge you have from playing a game like Space Empires does not translate to this game. So do not go in expecting this to be a Space Empire game. Because of this expectation, though, I imagine many players will bounce off of this game or have a harder time getting into it and what it's trying to do. No doubt, there will still be endless comparisons to other games that ultimately don't belong in the same conversation. Despite being smaller in scale, Arcs does not feel any less epic. You'll only be playing a 90-minute game and as a singular character with a small fleet, but because the battle is so hard fought, finishing a game of Arcs still elicits the same feeling as other epic space games. On the plus side, it's a game you don't have to commit a whole day to. It's a game that won't take up 2 acres of table space. It's a game you can confidently teach any player of any skill level or game experience. And you don't need 6 to 8 players to make it work. This is billed as a 2 to 4 player game, and the crazy thing is, it works well at all of those player counts. And of course, Arcs is both fun and deep. It's fun to explore the interconnected systems. It's fun to wrestle with the endless push-pull nature of every decision. It's fun to roll these cool dice. It's fun to outplay your opponents in the action card game. It's fun to fight each other, not just in space, but in the court. It's fun to pull off really big swings with a combo of resource and card play. But the fun doesn't sacrifice strategic depth. Like I said, your first experiences with Arcs will be frustrating and make you think that this game is mostly random. A game reliant on drawing the right cards at the right time. But as I've played it more, and I'm about 30 games in now, I've realized how wrong that attitude was. The game presents you with constant decisions and tons of avenues to go down that give you flexibility in those decisions. You can and you will get better at playing the action cards. No matter what hand you're dealt, the more you play the game, you will be able to figure out a way to play them well. I'll put it this way. I did make a basic sub video for Arcs a while ago, a series that I've created to be a small, bite-sized series of videos that goes over initial strategies in a game, and I try to make those videos a crisp 10 to 15 minutes at most. But Arcs? My video was 35 minutes long, and that was the condensed version of the original hour-long edit. I simply didn't realize how deep and robust the strategy was in this game until I started writing out my notes on it. That's how deep this game is. And I'd also like to point out that the presentation is once again out of this world, like all leader games. The retro sci-fi fantasy art style that Kyle Farron went with for this game is a huge standout for me. Kyle's artwork is stunning as always, but specifically here, Arcs carves its own visual identity out of the crowd of homogenous-looking gray, black, and silvery aesthetic that sci-fi board games normally have. There's just something special about the color scheme, and the artwork on the board and cards in this game. It is both cool and cozy. It's both futuristic and old school. It's both familiar and alien. With barely any flavor text to speak of, Cole and Kyle's universe here is more immersive and alive than any other sci-fi board game I've played. I want an RPG set in this universe yesterday. I want nothing more than to read all of the lore I know Cole has written for this game. But Leader Games, if you're watching this, I will pay a full price for a full art lore book of Arcs. I just want all the art and all the lore. Please give it to me. I will buy it immediately. Finally, the components themselves are all pretty and efficient. Compared to the unwieldy giant squares of Root's player boards and the wall-to-wall double-sided text-filled player boards from Oath, these player boards are an insane improvement. The only text on these bad boys is the brief description of resource abilities. The rest is relegated to the simple iconography that easily helps the flow of play. I cannot tell you how much I love this. The wooden pieces for the ships and agents are also great. The colors pop wonderfully off the board and look excellent. The cards are also elegant. The action cards especially are very easy to parse at a glance, and I like how the ambition spaces on the board also tell you which numbers are tied to which card. It just really helps know exactly which cards you need to declare which ambitions. It helps news players a ton. And I especially appreciate how this game doesn't require a mountain of table space to play. You could fit this on pretty much any table, no problem. And that's pretty much it. Arcs is just a really solid game. It's a great, snappy, fast, competitive little game that takes the feeling of other epic space games but distills it down into a sweet, tight, 90-minute thrill ride. Both the presentation, as in the components, and Kyle's art are great. The game design is great, and honestly, I would happily put this game right up at the same level as Root or Oath in my estimations. It's just a really solid game, and I think there's not really much wrong with it.
I don't know. It just seems decidedly less ambitious and weird than I would expect from a Cole Wehrle game. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously, this is a good thing that this is a nice, streamlined, standalone game, but I don't know. I'm just, as you're explaining it, it doesn't seem like it'll be quite as epic or reach those same highs as, something like Twilight Imperium or Eclipse. I'm always down for a smaller standalone game, but what am I going to do when I don't have the time or the players, but I still actually want to play a game that is as big in scope and ambitions as those kinds of games? Okay, of course you would be the one to complain about Root and Oath before learning about Arcs, only to actually complain that Arcs is not more like Root and Oath after learning about it? Typical. I mean, come on, man. What do you even want from a game? Look, I just want something that can both be small and big. Something that can be a single standalone session, but can also be a giant day-long affair, but something that takes a fraction of the time and the rules. I really don't think that's so much to ask. Why can't a single game give me both of those? Come on, man. Don't be stupid. No single game can give you both of those experiences, okay? I mean, that's why there are so many games.
Well...
Well, what?
I may or may not have told the whole truth about Arcs. There may or may not be one more expansion.
Another expansion? Okay, I mean, how much could a single expansion really add? What is that?